Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. I hope that everybody's doing well and getting snuggled up and indoors ready for our Libra Solar Eclipse. I know how much we all just love eclipses and eclipse season. This month we have a decent selection of talismanic collections to choose from. We have about 6 coming up. Of course, that's not going to be 6 for everybody. It'll be different depending on where you live. But we have a good number of elections to cover a few different things to kind of keep everybody happy, to tide us over as we hopefully start to enter a phase of better elections to use. We've had some issues lately with various planets being, we're going to say, conducive to the business, with various planets being helpful or being good partners or ascendant rulers, and we do still have some problems. Saturn's still retrograde, you may have heard. Jupiter will be retrograde during this period, so we'll lose Jupiter. Jupiter's a planet that we've had kind of a difficult time with, just because of the square between Saturn and Jupiter anyway. But we have kind of entered a period now where Jupiter is like far enough away from the square of Saturn for that to not necessarily be as big of an issue. But then it's going to go retrograde and kind of come right back for it. So we're gonna enter a difficult period with Jupiter, kind of more so. The Sun and Mars have been a complicated pair, as we'll kind of see moving into it. We'll have times where the Sun becomes unavailable because of the Mars square, the Sun in Libra, Mars in Cancer. But all in all, and we're still doing our best. We're still doing what we can, and even with that, we were able to get a few really nice elections, even with all this difficulty kind of happening. So there's some bright spots in this, and things will kind of come back online as other planets do, as we get as the Sun and Mars separate off after this month. And then as Saturn turns retrograde in a couple of months, we'll see. Saturn turns direct in a couple of months. We'll start to see some more things open up, or at least not have to kind of pretzel ourselves as much to get good elections to come up. So going ahead and diving into it, our first election opportunity is going to be for an 18th Lunar Mansion talisman, and unfortunately this is going to be a North American kind of exclusive, and how this one works out is going to depend on where you fall kind of within the North American continent. So keep an eye out and kind of readjust this chart based on your location to see what it will take for you to get it. So the 18th Lunar Mansion is a mansion that is focused primarily on healing. It is it's a really good example, I think, of like a martial healing talisman, just because of a lot of the imagery and how the talisman operates. It's healing, but it's very sort of like predatory in its healing nature. So what I mean by that is, that sounds silly, but what I mean by that is, it is more of a talisman whose goal or whose focus is to consume the disease. So it's useful for people who are already sick with something or struggling with something. And not very useful, in my experience at least, and there may be others who have different experiences I'd love to hear back. In my experience, not super helpful for sort of like health maintenance or for like preventative health. There are other talismans that I think do a much better job of that, much more clearly. Whereas the 18th Lunar Mansion, I've actually had experiences where once the problem has been solved, once the illness has been overcome or subdued or managed, or kind of whatever you want to phrase it, the 18th Lunar Mansion kind of lashes out and tries to find other things that are wrong. So it's very useful if you have a situation that you want it to help you with, but it's not so useful after that. It's like, okay, thanks, dude, great job, you did a great job, you're off now, rather than something that you kind of want to keep around. So for our election, that's going to be on October 5th at around 1 p.m. for my location. So like I said, make sure to set this and kind of play around with it. And here we've got the moon in the 18th mansion and conjoined this Venus here in Scorpio. Perfect. Excellent. This is what I want. I like it when we have the moon and a benefic planet coming into a connection while the moon is in that mansion. Especially if that benefic planet can be in that mansion simultaneously, like with a conjunction. So I really like this. And we've got Jupiter as the ruler of the first house here in Gemini. I think we're far enough away, like I was saying, from the square of Jupiter to not really have to worry about it. Kind of the big issue, I guess, with Jupiter is that it is stationing retrograde in just a couple of days from this time period. So something to keep in mind. It might not be it depends. I don't really like it when the ruler of the first house is retrograde. When the ruler of the first house is like slowing down or coming to a station, I don't really mind it all that much. Unless it's like the exact day of a station, in which case I think that's kind of not doing too hot. But it's a situation that I want to make sure that you're aware of so that you can decide whether or not you want to move forward with making this talisman. This Jupiter is moving very slowly. I don't super mind that, but I know that the station is in a few days from here, and that might be kind of within people's time frames where they're like, I don't really want to mess with that. And I completely understand. Part of the issue with this talisman, and this might be what you run into trying to recreate this talisman in other time zones, is that it really functions off of this Moon and Venus conjunction. So if I had put it like on the ascendant, which is what I initially wanted to, because then you have Mars as the ruler of the first house, and Mars isn't like retrograde or anything like that. You don't really have anything to worry about with that. But the issue is that you actually get like this trine to Saturn instead of the immediate conjunction to Venus, and that's less ideal. That's much more of a difficult contact. Because Saturn is retrograde, and I don't like the Moon applying to retrograde planets in my talismans. And even here, you could probably finesse it out to get like the Moon just having separated from Saturn, like a 14-degree and 5-minute Pisces Moon, and just been fine with that. But I don't know. The more we do that, the further we get away from the ascendant, and the further we fall kind of more into the 12th house. So you definitely have to kind of cut it somewhere, which is why I decided that the 11th house conjunction was probably better, happening a few hours later. So in some ways, this talisman, this is what I was talking about like having to pretzel yourself into weird positions to make elections work. And that's kind of what we ended up doing with this one. It's not what I would call one of the best 18th Lunar Mansion talismans that I've ever seen, but it's a really great opportunity to take advantage of a Moon-Venus conjunction in a mansion that is associated with health and healing. So I definitely would like to be able to take advantage of that if we can, and kind of having to make do with some of the more difficult, or not necessarily even difficult, but kind of less ideal positions because of that, is something to kind of factor into to consider for yourself. So I would recommend moving forward with it if you have a situation that you need help with now. But maybe if you don't, we wait and we see what this mansion looks like, in a month. Our next electional opportunity is going to be for the 24th Lunar Mansion, and this is going to be something that's available for North America and Western Europe and Northern Africa. Australia is going to sit this one out for now, but they'll be back in the game in just a bit. But the 24th Lunar Mansion is one that's all about like fertility and multiplicity. It does have usage for people who are, trying to become pregnant, who are trying to have a child, and to be able to carry that pregnancy to term successfully. So there is that aspect of it as well. It also has kind of a more general like multiplicity, abundance vibes to it that makes it very helpful for anybody who's looking for additional ways to, make money, or increase the amount of money that they make, or open up new avenues or opportunities for money, that kind of thing. So we definitely have this theme of like growth and abundance involved, and the 24th Lunar Mansion is one of my favorites. And I'm always very happy when we have a good election chance for it. The tradition talks about you sort of make the talisman or incorporate materials of the thing that you're trying to multiply into the talisman itself. So like the text says like, oh, you can increase this is the Pika trick specifically. You can increase your cow herds if you want to have more cows by making the talisman with like cow horn, or like you can increase your sheep flock if you make the talisman out of ram's horn, things like that. So that's kind of the methodology that we're using. And just insert thing you want to multiply here. I recommend cat hair. It's a good one. Don't do that. That's terrible. It's a terrible idea. As she like sneaks off and behind her curtain there. But usually the way that I recommend most people utilize it is to like use a dollar bill, like use some form of currency to incorporate it into your talisman somehow, like sacrifice the dollar to draw a picture on and like put in part of your talisman, keep in your wallet as a way to use it. That's like that gets into a very sort of like old school technique. So do that. I recommend that. But looking at our election here, not our talisman, looking at our election, this takes place for North America on October 11th at 2013, so about 8:15 p.m. And here we're going to have the moon in the 24th mansion on the midheaven. And she's going to be applying this kind of like a wide trine to the sun. I had to get my sun connection in, obviously. And the only kind of downside with this, I guess we'll keep going from here before I get into that. The ruler of the first house is going to be Venus here in Scorpio. She's unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. She's far enough away from the sun to not be combust. The ascendant degree is also unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. So the ascendant degree and Venus herself are very safe where they are. And really the only downside, the moon as well, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The only downside is just how wide the trine is, just how wide the application between the sun and moon are. I don't really like it when the moon is very far from where her next aspect is going to perfect. I try to keep it at, I'm not going to say that I try to keep it as close as I possibly can because that sounds really silly. But my excitement increases about a talisman the closer the moon is to completing her next aspect, because in my experience, that and the moon's speed at the time factor in very heavily for a talisman that is able to get its job done very, very quickly. So the closer an aspect is to perfecting for the moon and the faster the moon is going, the more quickly we can expect a turnaround time for effects of the talisman to manifest. I think the moon is moving quickly here, but I don't... Yeah, okay, so as you can, we'll put this here, make sure you can see it. Just kind of scrolling along here, you can see the moon is fast. So the moon is moving quickly, which is good, but there is a kind of a large gap between herself and her next aspect, about 15 degrees. So that's kind of not good. So we expect more of a middling result, but that's really the only downside of this election is just how far the moon is from that aspect. Everything else looks really good, and I definitely recommend grabbing this if you find yourself with nothing else to do on a Friday night at 8:15. The Western European and North African version of this chart is going to be very similar. It's going to be for October 11th at 2040. And here we're going to have the moon, same thing in the 24th mansion on the midheaven. And she's also still applying this trine to the sun. Now you can see that the trine has gotten a bit wider. It was 15 degrees in the North American version. But in Western Europe and North Africa, it's going to be about like 16 degrees. So we've gotten a bit more space there. The moon is still moving very quickly, and kind of rehashing my statements from earlier. The moon being far from the completion of her next aspect slows down our kind of expected time for when the talisman is most effective. But the moon being quick, like moving quickly at this time, helps to make up that difference, I think. We have Gemini on the ascendant, which points us down here to Mercury in Libra as the ruler of the first house. And Mercury is just far enough away from the sun to not be combust. I personally use the 7.5 degree orb for combustion. And so Mercury here at like 8.5-ish degrees is far enough away to not really have to worry about that. But if that is something that you're worried about, if you maybe have like a bit of a wider orb for combustion, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with actually backing this election up a few minutes to get Taurus on the ascendant and then Venus as the ruler of the first house. If you just want to like skip the controversy or like skip the whole thing entirely, I 100% agree that would be a great idea. So consider that. If you consider instead backing up to a late Taurus ascendant, if you don't even want to mess with Mercury and Gemini, don't even want to deal with it, maybe also consider it if you've got like Venus in your natal second house or Taurus and Libra ruling your second house, kind of a thing. So a way to personalize it a little bit, a way to kind of get in there and do a little bit more with it. But Venus is doing fine if you choose to do the Venus ruled ascendant. Mercury is doing okay if you choose to do the Gemini ascendant. And there you go. There's your 24th Lunar Mansion. Our next electional opportunity is going to be one that everybody will be able to pick up. So we have opportunity in North America, in Western Europe, Northern Africa, and in Australia. The hat trick, the legendary hat trick, we're going to call it from now on. Oh, maybe Turkey, because that's bowling. I'm more into bowling. I've never played hockey, so maybe it's a turkey. Plus, the turkeys are kind of adorable. So the 25th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily focused on agriculture, on growth, particularly like the health and growth of plants. And my feeling of it has always been like orchards, like trees, like plants that are supposed to be here for a long time, that are like investment pieces, kind of a thing. So you can absolutely go to the 25th Lunar Mansion for assistance if you are, interested in gardening or farming or homesteading or anything like that. Anything that focuses on kind of the health of plants that then go on to, of course, support you in some way. But it's very difficult to separate out this mansion and kind of its methods or what it talks about and how it's used from sort of like long-term financial planning. I often always think of these more agriculturally focused talismans as having some influence on wealth and income, just knowing how people, provided for themselves for hundreds of years. Today we do it a little bit differently, but the kind of core is still the same. So I would also recommend the 25th Lunar Mansion for anybody who's working on or interested in like investments in finance, in growing investments, in like making good investment decisions, or just kind of like increasing their basically if you have a retirement account or like a safety net or something that you have been investing in and are counting on paying off one day, I think the 25th Lunar Mansion is a really great addition to this. So taking a look at our election for North America, this is going to take place on October 12th at 10:13 a.m. And we're going to have the moon down here in the third house in the 25th mansion. And she's still going to be continuing on the way to apply that trine to the sun that we talked about in the election for the 24th mansion. Here we have it much closer. Now we're within, 7 degrees. This is a much more comfortable space to be in for a moon aspect, especially for a planet like the sun. And moving quickly. So this is one that we could expect to start to see results from, very soon after its creation, very soon after kind of giving it a goal. We've got Mars as the ruler of the first house up here in Cancer. Mars is doing fine. He's not afflicted by Saturn. We've got a square from the sun. I don't really care about that. The sun's not super central to it. The sun doesn't, by that I mean like the sun doesn't afflict things by square terribly normally. We were really more worried about the conjunction with the sun. The sun doesn't like rule the first house or anything like that, so I'm not super worried about that. And the ascendant degree is also unafflicted by anything that would cause an issue. And we even have Venus, a benefic planet in the ascendant, kind of giving us an extra sense of stability and kind of good graces there. So another form of like goodwill here from Venus, kind of being focused here. So really great. I also like that there's a trine aspect here between Venus and the ruler of the first house. So there's a lot of room here for that sort of like benefic growth energy. Not only do we have like the waxing moon and the moon applying to the sun and all that sort of goodness baked into it, but also a benefic on the ascendant in connection with the ascendant and the ruler of the first house. So there's a lot of good here to work with. It would have been really awesome if Venus had been in a better sign, but we do what we can. The Western Europe and Northern African version of this chart takes place on October 12th at around 21:31, so around 9:30 p.m. And here we're going to have the moon. It's going to be very similar, except for now the moon is on the midheaven. We're going to have the moon on the midheaven in the 25th mansion, and she is going to be applying that trine to the sun. Now even closer, now 4 degrees. So we're getting there. So move 4 degrees distance. Moving very quickly. I'm very, very happy with that. That's real good. So a really nice kind of speedy, quick response from the talisman is what we would typically expect. We've got Mercury as the ruler of the first house because of Gemini. We would not be able to back this one up for Taurus, but now there's a solid 9 degree distance from the sun and Mercury, hopefully getting us out of kind of whatever orb of combustion that you might typically use. I know I've heard like 8.5 and 7.5, things like that. So definitely have some space there for the wider connections. And we've got Jupiter in the first house. He's in Gemini, he's retrograde, and he's just doing the best he can. He's just going to help out in whatever way that he can, which might not be much, but he's going to... you know what? I'm just realizing we can't use this election. So that really sucks. I'm sorry, North America. I'm sorry, Western Europe and North Africa, but we actually can't use this election because I'm a big dummy and I forgot I didn't see Saturn here as a no square to the ascendant, which is not okay. We can see if we can salvage this a little bit. So given that the 25th Lunar Mansion's boundaries are from 8 to 21 Aquarius, we could do like a direct copy-paste on the North American version if we wanted to. The big thing that we're giving up is we give up a lot of ground for that moon trine to the sun. Now we have like a huge amount of space between it. 10 degrees, that's a lot. The sun and moon can have, like 12, 11 and a half degrees between them. Insofar as like what an aspect of them constitutes, so they have a pretty wide orb together anyway, and 10 degrees is within that, so there is that connection there. But it's still like 10 degrees is a lot. That's like a day. That's a day and a half. That's a day of motion essentially for the moon, like 2/3 of the day basically. So it's a lot of time. But we would still have a lot of those connections that we had. Mars rules the first house. He's fine, and Venus is in the first house to get some support there. And that's at like 11:11 a.m. So that's an option. we can move forward, and unfortunately, if we can't have the moon on the ascendant because the ruler of the first house would be Saturn, and Saturn's retrograde, and I don't like that, so that's a no. And we could potentially do a time. Yeah, we could do a time like this, I guess. Something like at around, let's see, what time is this? 7 o'clock, 7 p.m., 1900, with the moon in the 11th house, which is fine. Applying the trine to the sun. We've made up a lot of degrees. Now the distance is about 5-6 degrees, which is much better. Aries is on the ascendant, Mars is on the cusp. I'm sorry, Mars rules the first house. So there are a few other options that we can use, but the initial time is not going to work because of the Saturn square to the ascendant. But if you want to do direct copy of the North American version with kind of the wide sun moon orb, that's there 11:11 a.m. Or if you want to do like 19 at 7 p.m., that's an option as well. So sorry about that, but here's some alternatives. And then the Australian version of this chart takes place on October 12th at 1935. And here we're going to have the moon on the midheaven in the 25th mansion, applying that trine to the sun. Just get used to it. And we've got some distance here now, like we did in some of the other charts, about 10 degrees distant. I'm not a super big fan of that, but the moon is moving quickly to help kind of mitigate that. At the same time, we've got Venus as the ruler of the first house here in Scorpio in the 7th. She's doing fine, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, not combust the sun. The ascendant isn't afflicted by Mars or Saturn. Who would have thought? I can account for that successfully sometimes. And I mean, it's just it's a good solid 25th mansion. I would have enjoyed the sun moon aspect being tighter, but it is what it is, and this is what we got to work with. Our fourth election opportunity is going to be for the 26th Lunar Mansion. And this is a lunar mansion that's very much focused on like friendship, goodwill, and community. So I like the 26th Lunar Mansion, especially for people who are trying to like solidify or branch out or like make new friends or kind of find their place in any sort of like social group, whether that's a smaller one or a wider one. And what's different about the 26th Lunar Mansion is that it isn't one that's necessarily about like quantity. It's not about like, it's not a lot about like the acquaintances. It's not about like knowing a bunch of people or things like that. There can be that aspect to it, and I would imagine that if that's what you wanted, the 26th could deliver that. I don't see why it necessarily wouldn't, but I think where it really performs well, where it really excels, is the ability to create like a stable, lasting, meaningful, and like uplifting friendships and community connections. So it's not necessarily there just to like, inflate numbers or, increase your contact list or things like that. But it's there to bring people or groups into your life that are there to serve a purpose, that are there to help you kind of like move on from one stage of life to the next, or kind of like have that personal development and have those like really rich, concrete connections that can then go on to last, lifetimes. So no matter where you are in your life, no matter kind of like no matter how old you are, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what the situation is, the 26th Lunar Mansion can help introduce you to people that can be that kind of like uplifting support that you need. So I definitely recommend this, especially since we're kind of dealing with a kind of general epidemic of loneliness for a lot of people in a lot of different groups. Let's try this out for a bit. Let's see where these connections take us. So for the Western European and Northern African version, it's going to be a chart you're kind of familiar with. You've seen this one before. And it is that chart with the moon here in the 3rd house with Scorpio rising. And the moon in the 26th mansion here is going to be applying this very close square to Venus in the 1st house. And like, that's fine. I think that's perfectly fine. Squares tend to be a bit like a more rougher contact that we generally like, sort of our least ideal aspect, not counting the opposition because we know that oppositions are trash. But a square aspect, this connection is good. This connection is useful. And I also really like that Venus happens to rule the 11th house in the chart. I don't always look super deeply into that, but it is really fun when those things line up. So it's a situation where you have the ruler of the 11th in the 1st house, and then the moon is applying a square, an aspect to the ruler of the 11th. So we have some fun connections that are played around with. To really get a lot of that kind of Venus coming together community. So for Australia, our 26th Lunar Mansion talisman is pretty different. Here we're going to have the moon and the midheaven in the 26th mansion, and she's going to be applying in the. She's going to be okay. We have that. This I thought she was going to be. I thought we were doing something else. She's going to be applying a really tight square to Venus, so we still have that Venus connection coming through. Venus, of course, being a benefic planet, but a benefic planet that's more about like the socialization, more about like the human interaction, the humanistic aspect of like friendships, of community, and that kind of like communal, what it is that we have in common. That really strong binding agent there. Meanwhile, Venus is going to rule the first house and be unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. Initially, I thought when I was first looking at it again, that the moon was going to be applying a trine to Mercury here in Libra, and I think that would be fine too. So I don't think we're going to have an issue. Maybe depending on where you are in Australia, the moon might be kind of in a different place or applying slightly differently. So if you are in that point in time where the moon is, maybe has just separated from Venus and now applying the trine to the Mercury here in Libra, I think that's really helpful too, just because of how important it is, like how important, of course, like communication is to reaching other people and connecting with other people, especially like in Libra, which is a sign all about that nonsense. So either option I think would be really solid as long as you maintain that kind of like Taurus ascendant. I don't really see there being an issue with either planet, no matter which one you end up getting. So our second to last electional opportunity is going to be for the fourth lunar mansion. And this is a mansion that is more famously associated with pest control and sort of like this more cursing aspect. So because of this, the fourth lunar mansion is one that we approach differently from other talismans, in that we turn a lot of our guidelines on their heads or like kind of like reverse them, because the idea is we're trying to make the chart as debilitated as potentially possible to, increase its effectiveness, to increase its sort of noxiousness, that we're then going to point towards, whatever the pest is that we're dealing with, snakes, lizards, scorpions, spiders, bugs, pesky mammals, people trying to break in on my recording, things like that. So with that in mind, our fourth lunar mansion talisman actually isn't all that impressive. It's just kind of here. It's something to utilize, but I wish it had been worse. So we've got the moon here in the fourth mansion on the midheaven. And what is she applying to? Let's see if I can see it. Oh, the sextile with Mars? Yeah, the sextile with Mars. And I like the connection with Mars here. Generally, you would want the moon to be like, square Saturn or square Mars or besieged in some way like that. Like make the moon's condition terrible so she passes that on towards whatever it is the talisman is aimed at. So the sextile with Mars here is not... it's not the most rough. It's not the roughest thing that we would typically want, but Mars does have that not in my house energy, that sort of like pushing back, that that driving away. That's the word. That driving away energy that we would typically want from a talisman like this. At the same time, we have the sun as the ruler of the first house. And so we want the sun to be debilitated, and I guess we kind of have that with the sun being in Libra. I don't super look into like planetary dignity that much with lunar mansion talismans. I don't think it's all that helpful. But what we do have is we have the square with Mars. So we do have a situation where at least the ruler of the first house is afflicted by a malefic planet, while the moon is applying to kind of a malefic planet. So we have some of the groundwork there for a functional fourth lunar mansion talisman. I wish it had been worse. I wish there had been more, like a more direct affliction to the ascendant would have been really good. And if the moon had been like actually in a square aspect with Mars, that would have been really great too. But we do have some of those foundational pieces of a sort of like weaker effective fourth lunar mansion talisman. So hopefully that'll be something to help people who are kind of struggling with some sort of like infestation or situation that they're dealing with to get some momentum going on it. But this definitely should have been... I miss the days, he said longingly, when the nodes were around here, because even if things weren't going well kind of like anywhere else, I could always be like, well, at least there will be a good fourth lunar mansion talisman out of this. But we don't have that anymore. The nodes have moved on, much to the joy and jubilation of individuals who had planets in like mid-Taurus and mid-Scorpio. But for the rest of us, we didn't know what we had. We didn't know how good it was. So our final electional opportunity for this Libra solar eclipse is going to be for a Regulus fixed star talisman. And this will be an opportunity that everybody will be able to take advantage of if they're lucky. So Regulus is a really great fixed star in the constellation of Leo. That's associated, of course, with like leadership, military honors, healing from melancholy, branding, things like that. So it tends to be a very fortunate fixed star in a lot of different ways. especially for people who are striving for like leadership titles, who are trying to like dig more, like lean more into leadership roles. For people who are struggling with particular health concerns, Regulus is discussed in the texts as kind of specifically countering the melancholic humor, which is kind of like a complex disease system, we'll say, that has both physical complaints such as like mobility impairment, autoimmune disorders, and also kind of like mental or spiritual complaints, depression, grogginess. Well, grogginess is more of a sanguine issue, I guess. But like depression, irritability, isolation, kind of a general ennui kind of a thing. So it's a very, melancholy is a pretty complicated thing, and perhaps if you want to know more about melancholy, check out my video on the humors, for kind of more information there. But generally the idea is like Regulus is helpful for helping people overcome depression, helping to overcome mood disorders, helping to overcome these kind of pains and illnesses that hang on to the body that are due to this increase in the melancholic humor. But like I said, we also see it with things like career goals, with honors, with winning awards, that kind of thing. So if you are, if that sounds fun to you, everybody needs, I'm mostly of the opinion that like everybody should have a talisman for every fixed star, just because why not? So if you're missing your Regulus talisman, here is potentially your opportunity to grab that and to do something really fun with it. So for North America, this election takes place on October 26th at 9:13 in the morning. So here we're going to have the fixed star Regulus on the midheaven. It's now at 0 degrees Virgo, and the moon very closely applying the conjunction to it, while at the same time, she's applying a sextile to the sun. So for Regulus, kind of the general rules for fixed stars, in my opinion, are the star needs to be on the ascendant or the midheaven, the moon needs to be applying a connection to it immediately, and then she must also be applying an aspect to a planet that's of the nature of that star. Now, for Regulus, that's Jupiter or Mars. So Regulus is a star that's said to be of the nature of those two planets. So I think it's very, very, very important to have Mars or Jupiter kind of help cement that connection in the chart by having the moon applied to it. But I'll do a caveat here in that I think that for Regulus and for Sirius too, honestly, they have such strong solar overtures that I've had really great success with Regulus talismans that have sun connections in them, like even instead of the Mars or the Jupiter connection. So that's why we have this connection to the sun, instead of kind of the more general Jupiter or Mars that you would probably expect from me if you kind of are aware of my kind of general electing criteria that I tend to follow. But it's just that Regulus has such strong solar qualities, Sirius as well, that they do very well with sun connections. So we're gonna use it. We're gonna go with it. At the same time, we're gonna have this Scorpio ascendant, which is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, and then Mars over here, chilling out in Cancer, not in a hard aspect with Saturn or anything like that. So we've got the moon where she needs to be, applying to what she needs to, while the ruler of the ascendant and the ascendant itself are unharmed, and that's going to be at 9:13 on October 26th in North America. Get it while it's hot. Western Europe and North Africa has a little bit more of a dicey situation, I think. So they're going to have kind of that same thing, Regulus on the midheaven, the moon applying the conjunction here, and the moon applying the sextile to the sun. But where they're kind of more tenuous, I guess, is just how far the moon is. So I am a 5-degree orb from angles guy. So here we've got 25 degrees 55 Leo moon, 0 degrees 28 minute Virgo. That's like 4.5 degrees away. So you gotta sync this in real tight. You got like 2 minutes. 2 minutes to do something with this election, which is not super fun, but that's the way that they go sometimes. This election is going to be for October 26th at 9:40 in the morning. So it's a Saturday morning. You should, hopefully your schedule allows you to have plenty of time to get set up if this is an election you want to move with, because you're not going to have a very big window to make it work, or else the moon becomes cadent, kind of very quickly. And I don't like that very much. I don't like that. So this is the, if you're lucky kind of situation. If you're lucky and you can pull it off in 2 minutes, absolutely you can do it. But if because the window's so small, a lot of people probably aren't going to be able to really take advantage of it like they would have otherwise, which is, I don't know, it's unfortunate. Hopefully there will be more movement here with Regulus. There hadn't been for a very long time, because Saturn, as you can see here, Saturn back here in kind of mid-Pisces now, was, of course, earlier Pisces, and so the moon in late Leo or the very beginning of Virgo would immediately be applying this opposition to Saturn, which is no bueno. So now that Saturn's kind of backed off from that, we have more room to make Regulus talismans again. And so after this retrograde period with Saturn ends and we kind of see more movement towards Aries, we should see a lot more open up. But that's just a lot to say that we've had some issues in the past, but hopefully we're moving on. And then finally, Australia, their version of the Regulus election, also kind of tenuous, but in a different way, is on October 27th at 2:44 in the morning. And that kind of very similar setup, except for now the moon is on the ascendant. You've got Regulus on the ascendant, the moon applying to the conjunction of Regulus, basically right on Regulus. And then the sextile to the sun to kind of cement that those solar qualities, solar healing, solar leadership qualities into it. And so this one you have to be very careful, I guess, because actually I don't think you have to be very careful in this one. It's not great that the moon is so close that she might actually technically be separating from the star. They're like right on top of each other. But I mean, we're gonna roll with it as much as we can. You could probably get the actually, this would probably be about the only time you could really do it. I was going to say you might be able to back the time up a little bit, but I don't think you really can. I think this would be kind of it. But again, kind of that connection. You have all the rules there that you need to follow. The moon applies to the sun to bring that in. But hopefully you're able to make yourself something with it, do something spectacular, and have yourself a Regulus talisman for yourself to have, just in case we're not able to follow up on it like next month or the month after. We'll see kind of where it goes. But all right, everybody, those were our electional opportunities for our Libra new moon, our Libra solar eclipse coming up. We were starting to see some good stuff coming out. We have like kind of a smattering, well, not really a smattering, a good concentration of talismans for like the moon in Aquarius, taking advantage of that moon sun trine, and then kind of a fun Regulus talisman to take advantage of too. Hopefully I don't know, I keep feeling like I am perpetually in this cycle. I'm like, hopefully next month's better. But I do feel like we have a pretty nice selection of talismans at least to work with this month. But I would really like to see more fixed star stuff come online. And that's been very difficult, just for kind of a variety of reasons. But remember to always keep an eye out for your heliacal rises, for your local heliacal rises, as a way to incorporate fixed star magic in a kind of a different technique, a different system that doesn't rely so heavily on the constraints and the rules that the kind of more general elections that we normally talk about here do. So keep an eye on those. Those are very location dependent, and there's a video where I show you where you can look up and see your heliacal rises through the free planetarium software Stellarium. So please look into that to get an idea of when those might be coming and how you might be able to utilize them in your practice when the sky is not being super helpful. So it can be really helpful for like if you know you have a fixed star that you want, but you haven't been able to find a good election for it. Well, you'll at least have one day a year on their heliacal rise where you'll be able to do something to get it. So keep a lookout for that, and I will see you all again on our Scorpio new moon for elections, and on our our Taurus full moon for whatever the hell happens, for whatever I decide to do then.